In this video, we're going to build a blogging site using Contentful headless CMS and Next.js. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Hamed. I'm a full stack JavaScript developer, and here on this channel, we mainly talk about modern web dev topics like React and Next.js. So let's go. Before we get started, I have a quick announcement to make. So I've gone ahead and created a brand new Next.js course. If you're interested in learning how to build full stack apps using React and Next.js, and like the way that I teach, this might be the course for you. We'll cover everything there is to learn about Next.js, all the way from the basics to the more advanced stuff. We're going to be building 3 projects throughout this course together and learning these concepts by building these projects. It's currently on sale until the end of February. The course will launch by the end of March or beginning of April. So if you're interested, check it out. Okay, so let's get started with our project. Let me show you what we're going to build in this blogging site using Contentful and Next.js. We're going to have a simple Next.js app like the one that you're seeing over here with a simple layout and a posts endpoint or page that kind of indexes all of our blog posts, and when we click on each individual post, we'll be taken to that post where we have different assets, different content type, or rich text, if you will. And then we're going to take it to more advanced stuff like links to internal content like the first post, or external links like linking to google.com, so going outside of our site, and also putting stuff like code blocks, images, assets, or embedding videos. We're going to manage all of this content in Contentful. So we're going to create an account and build the content models necessary to create this together. Then we're going to start the Next.js application, kind of fetch our content from Contentful, and then kind of glue these two together. So let me just close this off, and also that page, and let's get started with this. Okay, so if you don't have a Contentful account, you can just go ahead and create one. I already have created one account. Once you create an account for the first time, it would kind of instruct you on an onboarding flow where you can build an organization and then a space to create your content and content models. So let me just try and see if we could do this together so you know how to go ahead. So let's say we're creating this from the ground up. I'm going to create a new organization. So this is going to be our kind of YouTube tutorial. So once you create a new organization or your first organization, it will ask you or prompt you to create a new space. You can give your space a name, for example, my space, and then select to start from an empty space. You could also select to start with an example. This comes with some templates from Contentful, but we're going to build everything from the scratch, so you can select the empty space. You hit continue, confirm, and create, and this will create your brand new space. So in this space, you can see right now we don't have any content or any content models defined. Now the content model is a way to describe a specific piece of content, whether it's a section on your site or it's representing a page. It's a content model. Now content model is a combination of different fields that allows you to define what a specific section is. So let's start by defining a new content type. Let's say for this example, we're going to build a blogging site. So we're going to need a, let's say, post content type. So I'm going to create our first content type. Now that we have created that content type, we can start adding fields to it. For example, we can have a title field. That's the title of our post. That's going to be a short text. Let me just go back. for a second. So once you create or try to add a new field, you could select different field types. As you can see here in Contentful, you have an option for a rich text field where you can put in text that are rich. For example, they have bolds and italics and links in them. We're going to see this in a second. You can have a simple text, which is titles, names, text on a button, and shorter text in general. You can have numbers, you can have date and time, you can have a location, which is geo coordinates. You could have media fields where it would hold images, videos, PDFs, and other files. We can have a Boolean field, a JSON object, or a reference, which is a link to another document. So we started with the text for the title, so let's just put in the name is title, the ID is automatically generated for us, and we're going to leave this at short text. It gives us the option for having a long text. We're going to use the long text in a second, but for this, let's just create and config this title field. Here you can have some validation rules set. For example, we can say this is a required field. We need this title to be required, to be put in anytime that there is a post created. And you can select different appearances for this specific field. So I'm okay with the way that it looks. Let's just now add another one. Let's put this as a slug. This is the path that shows up in the URL. We also would use this to uniquely identify the posts. So we're going to have a short text, create and config, and we're going to select the appearance for this to be a slug. And then we're going to say generate this slug automatically from the title. So create. And now that I have these two fields for my content model, if I save this, I can now go back to my content tab and add an entry. Now this entry is automatically going to be from a post type because that's the only content type we have. I just wanted to show you that this automatically gets created. So if I say my first blog post, you see this slug is automatically created for us, and that's kind of what we need. So if I publish this, now we have generated our first content, which is of post type or article with these two fields. So if I come back to my content right now, I can see in the content model, I have the post and also this first post. Now let's create another content model or content type. Let's name this an author. So this is the person who have actually written this article. For this, let's select a text that says name, and we want to make this to be required. Appearances, single line should be fine. And I want to add another field that says, maybe we want to include an image. So we're going to name this picture. So this is the author's picture. You're allowed to select one file, creating config. So validation, it's a required field, let's say, and let's only accept image file types. So these are the validation rules you can set for these fields. Here, I only want to accept images because it's an avatar. Confirm. So now I have this content type set for an author. So let's just go ahead to our contents and create one author. Let's say add an entry. Now, the last time that I hit add entry, it automatically took me to the page to add an entry because I only had one content type, which is the post. And that was the only thing we could create from. But now that we have two content models, an author and a post, when I actually go to my content and select to add an entry, which is an instance built from that content type, it asks me what type of content I want to create. Is it a post that I want to create, or is it an author? So I select an author, we'll just name it after myself. And for this picture or media, I can either add existing media or add a new media. So let's just go to the media tab and see. Right now, we don't have any media selected here. If I hit add asset, I can either add a single asset or multiple assets. So I can say single asset, title, let's say Hamid's picture, and let's just see if I have an image of myself here. Just bear with me for a second. Okay, I found an image, and now I want to publish this asset. So I've created an asset by uploading an image and giving it a title. So if I go now to my media, I can see there is this one image. So I go back to my content, and I have lost the author that I was creating for whatever reason. So I'm going to add an entry, an author, and I'm going, maybe I didn't publish it the last time. So I'm going to say Hamid Bahram, and then in the media, I'm going to select add existing media. I could have just selected add new media from here and add it here, but I just wanted to show you where in the tabs you could find the medias that you have. So I've created a new author. I'm going to publish this. Okay, now I can see this newly created author, which is from content type author. It has a name and my image. And if I just go back in my posts content type, I can now include a field to say, hey, I want to include a reference field, and I'm going to call this author, and I want to link into one reference, create and config. So in the validation, it's a required field, and then accept only specific or specified entry types. I can select this and say, hey, I want to be able to only link or reference an author to this field because this is specifically an author link. The default value, there is no default value, and appearance, we could just have a simple entry link, right? Now that I have this author, I can go back to my content, back to editing. Let's save this edit or addition. Let's save this update. Now, if I go back to my content and my blog post, right now I can see there's this author field added to my content. So I can add an existing content here. And because I selected to only be able to include author entries, it's just showing me this one author that I have created. So I can link to say, hey, this blog post has this title, that slug, and this is the guy who has written this article. Okay. So let's publish changes, go back to content model, and add some more field to our post. What else do we need here? Maybe we need a slug. For the slug, I'm going to select, some excerpt. So it's a little summary. For this, I'm going to include long text because we may have multiple lines or longer text here. So it's still a text field, not the rich text, but I have chosen the long text kind of option over here. Create and config. You could again say, hey, let's just make this also required. The shape can be this, which is where you would put markdown, or multiple lines, up to you. We may want to have a featured image, so I'm going to select a media. I'm going to call this cover image. One file, sure. Create and config. Validation, let's make it required only specific types. Let's only allow images here. So I'm going to confirm. So as you can see, we can build different fields that are going to shape this specific piece of content or content type, which is a blog post. So imagine that this is representing an article page where you would have your cover image, title, the author, and then some content. So what do we do for the content itself? We're going to put in a rich text, which allows us to have rich text inside of it. We're going to see in a second. So I will name it content. And as you can see here, all these options are the options that the user or the editor or the content creator or author can select when they're actually creating their content, and we'll do this together. So you can have H1 tags to H6, bold, italics, links, underlines, list elements. You can also have hyperlinks linking to external URLs, or linking to internal entries or internal documents, linking to assets like images and PDFs. You can also embed entries and assets like embedding another blog post inside a different blog post, embedding maybe a video inside of a blog post, which we're going to create as an entry or as another content type or custom type. And you can just select whatever you want to allow the editor to use. Maybe you say, hey, I don't want them to be able to choose H1 because that's only one for every page. They can select from the rest. In validation, you could say this is required. They need to put in something, and the appearance, there's only one that you can select. So right now you have the content too. So if I save this and go back to my content tab, go back to that first blog post that I created, I could see all of those fields that we added to our data model show up in my editor over here. So except this is the summary of my first blog post. I'm going to select, I can select the cover image, and I can write content, and this is where we can have rich text. For example, this is a regular paragraph. I can include a heading maybe over here to say heading 3, sure. This is a heading. Maybe we can include a list. So we can include a list to say item 1, item 2. And as you can see here, we have different options even for a link. So let's actually see this in action. We can link to an external URL, right? So let's make this a link, and then we can select different link types. It's URL, that's an external site or page. Entry is an internal document in our own content. An asset would be an image, PDF, or video. So let's go URL, and let's say we want to just go to google.com. Right? So we've inserted a link there to be shown. Okay, I'm going to pause the video and create some content over here, and we're going to continue together. Okay, I gone ahead and created 2 blog posts. First one is this guy. I added some image, added some rich text, some headings, some italic and bold text, and a block code over here. And I have selected myself as the author, and I actually also added a date field to our content type post so that we can select a date that we published or have kind of created this article. Now I also created a second blog post, and here I have included more stuff inside of the content. I have a link to the first blog post. I have linked to an external site, Google in this case. As you can see, we have list items. I've included a block of code that you could do with this. If you click on this ellipsis, there's 3 kind of dots. There is a code kind of block you could add, or select your text and then select this code to turn it into code. I have embedded an asset. So the way that you would do this, just so I could show it to you here, maybe I can show it to you down here. So if you want to embed an asset, you could see there is this embed link or button over here. You can have an entry. This is other entries that you have created inside your space. This can be other documents. There's an inline entry or an asset. So this image is an asset, so you could say an asset, and then it would tell you, okay, which asset do you want to kind of embed in this? I've selected that image. Or you can have, you can select to embed an entry where you can see here I have a video embed kind of type, an entry or a document, however you want to call it. and I have selected that as my video content over here. We're going to go over this part of it in a little while. For now, what I want to focus is actually rendering this text or rich text and taking care of this different type of links that we have, or this code block. And then we're going to talk about, more advanced stuff, which is linking to assets or embedding assets like images and YouTube videos. Okay. So let's go to our Next.js app and see how can we fetch these content we just created in our Contentful app. On the left hand side, I just created a simple Next.js app by running npx create next app. And all I did is replaced the content of the homepage to what you see here. It just says homepage. It's working with Tailwind CSS. So if you like it, you could just go to Tailwind CSS. It's very easy to set it up. You can go to the docs, you can go to framework guides, and on Next.js, it tells you how to install the dependencies for Tailwind, how to create a config and actually paste in this code, and then replace the content of your global CSS with these directives from Tailwind that kind of resets the styles in the browser, and then you're good to go to start using Tailwind. So the first step for us is to create a layout, a header with some navigation links and a footer. And the way you typically do that in Next.js, or the way that I would like to do it in Next.js, is that I will create a components folder where I can put in my components. And inside of it, I'll create a layout folder. We're going to have more components, for example, for posts. So for layout, let's just do a simple one, index.jsx. I have created this before. So let me just copy this so it saves us some time. So what are we doing here? Let me just get rid of this React. So as you can see here, it's a simple layout that shows a header with some links. So it's a list and some Next.js links going to home, going to /posts, where we would show an index of all the blog posts that we're going to fetch from Contentful. We are going to have this main tag, which renders the children or any page is going to be plugged in here. We're going to see this in a second, and then a footer. So that's a simple layout that we have. Now, how do we apply this to all of our pages? So we go to our _app.js, which is a component function that represents all the pages. And here what we can do is we can wrap this component or all of our pages with this layout that we have created. So let me just bring in this layout and then put this component inside of that layout. Okay, so as you can see, I have my global header going to home and going to posts. We don't have this route right now, so it 404s and our footer. Let me just copy over a little base style that I have created before, and I'm going to explain what this is. So I'm going to go to styles, global, and down here I'm going to paste them. It's just resetting some stuff, the full height and body in HTML, and I'm creating a section and a container kind of custom style. And if I save this, the footer should go down, and we should just wrap everything in a container that has a max width and centers everything, so it looks a bit nicer. So let's just close that off. Let me just also copy a prettier kind of config file so we can, right now it's just putting in semicolons at the end. So the way that I typically do this is I create a file over here. It's called .prettierrc. Oops, sorry. And I'm pasting in some kind of settings there to avoid parentheses for arrow functions, single quotes and stuff. So nothing crazy, but it just formats the code a little nicer. So the first step, we got the layout done. Let's just continue with creating this all posts route. So on the pages, we're going to create a new folder called pages, And inside of it, I'm going to have two files. I'm sorry, this is posts. So I'm going to have two files here. One is going to be index.jsx, which is going to represent our posts page. So right now we should see these all posts. And then I'm going to have another dynamic one, another file, which is a dynamic file that references the slug of our unique post to be shown there. So if I go to posts/ABC, if that's the slug, it just shows that individual page. Okay. So let's actually go back to, I'll just close all of these guys and just go back to our all posts page and try to connect to our Contentful account and fetch all of our posts and then show an index or a list of all the posts that we have on this page so the user can click on to go to that individual post. Now, to connect to Contentful, we need to install a package from Contentful that's called Contentful. So it's just to stop the development server and install Contentful. Now, once we install this package, we can create a client that connects to our Contentful account. So for this, I typically create a lib folder. Inside of it, I can have a Contentful folder. Inside of it, in this lib folder, you can have different type of functions, like maybe we can have utilities here. In the Contentful, I'm going to create a file called client.js, and inside of this, we're going to get the Contentful bear with me for a second. So we're going to get this Contentful from the package we just downloaded or installed, and we're going to create a client. And to create a client, you need at least these two variables, this space ID and the access token. So where would you get these? So you can go to your Contentful account and go to your Contentful account, and on the settings tab over here, you can come to API keys. I have created this kind of API keys. When you come here for the first time, there's nothing here. You can just add API key. Once you hit add API key, it will just show you this page where you can put a name for that API key, and you can grab your space ID from here. That's what you need on your application to connect to this space. And you have two API access tokens. One is for the content delivery API, so where you would just fetch your content, and the other one is for content preview API, which we're going to talk hopefully at the end of this video, which allows you to preview once you're editing your content. It allows you to preview your content before publishing it to your site. You're going to need this later on. So you can go ahead and create a .env.local inside of your project. And for now, we're going to have two variables inside of it, this space ID. So you're going to copy this from your own account. And the other one that we're going to copy is the Contentful access token. Don't worry about the preview right now. We're going to set that up later. So go ahead and do that. I'll do that myself and then I'll come back. Okay, I copied my environment variables. Let's just rerun the development server and go back to our index page. We should be able to connect to our Contentful account now and fetch all of our blog posts. We'll just quickly go over here so I can copy the code that I've written already. So pages. Okay. So let's see what's happening here. It's the same function that I had. I've added this get static props. This is the way that you fetch data in a Next.js application on the server side at build time. So it's going to be static pages fetched at build time. What we're doing is that we're importing this client that we just created in our lib folder, and we're calling the get entries function or method on this client that comes from the Contentful package. And we are specifying some query over here. I'm saying the content type that I want you to fetch is all the posts. Now, if you go to your Contentful account right here and search for content, you can see here, this is the post kind of type we created before. And this type is going to have an ID of post. So this ID of post is what you can see over here. And that's what I'm passing in to that to only fetch the content or the entries that are of that type post. And I'm just sending the response.items, which is that entries that I get or my posts, to the page component where I can map over them and for each one show this post card. So let's just go ahead and create this post card together. So in the components folder, we're going to have our post card over here. Let me just again copy the code so you don't have to watch me do this. Okay, in a postcard, we are getting a post. We're destructuring the fields that we had from it, like the title, the slug, the excerpt, the cover image, author, and date. These are the stuff we set up in our Contentful that comes with that data on the post on the fields, and we're trying to show them over here. Now, for each one of these, I've created some components to make it easier to pass data and to show it or to control what we want to show. So the first one is Contentful Image. Let's just create this together and see what this is going to do. Inside of our content components, maybe I create a UI folder, and inside of it, I can have a Contentful image.jsx. Let me just copy this over from here. Okay, so I've copied over the code, and all we're doing in this Contentful image is to render a next image and pass in all the props that we're sending to this Contentful image component. So if you're passing alt, source, width, and height, it's going to be passed to the underlying image component. The only thing is we're using a custom loader that allows us to pass in some parameters that can optimize our images coming from Contentful with a quality and width. This is something unique to Contentful. It actually serves up your images or your assets in an optimized way. So you can pass in some parameters here and change the quality of the image that you're getting or the width of the image that you're getting on the fly. Now, if you don't know how custom loaders work in Next.js, I have a video on my channel and a blog post about it that I explain everything that you need to know about Next.js, different settings, the way to style it, and custom loaders. You could just watch that. I will link it somewhere in the cards here. But nevertheless, it's as easy as this, that you can see a custom loader is just a function that returns kind of the path or some parameters to access your external host that's serving up your images. The only thing you need to do when you are using a custom loader is to actually update your next config.js. So let me just go here. If I go to my next config, what I can do over here is just pass in these images and loader specify a custom where you specify this. It's not going to use the Next.js built-in loader, and instead it's going to use your custom loader that we have just defined together. And anytime you are updating your next config, you have to restart the dev server. Okay. Now the next component that we have here is a date component. So let's just work on that. Let me just copy over again the code that we have over here. So components in the UI, I'm going to create a date component. And all we're doing here is we're getting a date string, we're getting some options and any other properties as sent, and we're rendering a time, and we're formatting that date with this format date function that I'm going to create inside of our lib. So inside of our lib folder or library in the utils, I can create a new function. Let's just put in index.js. And let's just have this function format date. It takes a date string and options. It uses the new Intel date time format, which is built in JavaScript, and then just forwards the options to that, gets this format function, and formats the date string that we're passing to it, so that our dates are looking nice and standard throughout our app. Now for the avatar, let's just create that together as well. So in the UI components, I'm going to create an avatar. And inside of this, again, what we're doing is we're showing the name of the author. So if you can see here, I'm passing in the name, which is coming from author. This is a field that we have on our post. Inside of it, there is another fields kind of property and a name, and also the picture, which holds our asset or the avatar for that specific author. So inside of here, I'm showing the avatar using that same contentful image that we created together over here, and also the name of the author. That's all. So with this, I think if we go back to our page and to our posts, okay, so one thing that I forgot to set up is a JS config.json, where I can specify these shortcuts to the folders. I don't have any contents. Lib video utilities are inside of our lib. Styles, sure, maybe. Public hooks, we don't have it, but just let's leave it at that. So if I go to my posts right now, and the reason why I did this before I actually go ahead is that you see how on, I mean, I wasn't doing it here, but on some of the pages you could see I was importing because I copied the code, and I was using these aliases to access components instead of like going ... and then, you know, if your project becomes big and you have folders and subfolders, instead of just having to come back out of these folders to reach where you want to go, if you are having this shortcuts set, you can just go ahead and include links like that it's just going to point to the file that you're looking to get. Okay, nevertheless, on the all posts page, as you can see, we're fetching the two blog posts that we have. The first blog post, they're all going to correctly showing that slug up there. If you can see, maybe I can make this a bit bigger. Actually, it doesn't change that URL bar. But anyways, right now, both of them are not showing anything because we're not dynamically fetching these segments, but they do show this slug correctly. So let's just do that next. Let's implement the dynamic page for each post. Again, I'll cheat to copy some codes I've written here so you don't have to watch me. Okay, let's see what we're doing over here step by step. So on this page, the idea is that we want to show the content of each individual blog post. So we're going to have to fetch that individual blog post first. We're going to do that with get static props. On the get static props, as you know, on the context object that's passed to this function by Next.js, you'll get a params object on which you can get the slug of that page, that specific dynamic route or segment of your URL that's representing an individual unique blog post. So we're going to get that slug. Ignore this line for a second. We're going to come back to this. This is for when we want to enable previewing our content. This preview is also sent to the context object by Next.js. We're going to explain this later on in the video, but ignore that for a second. All we're doing is get this slug from the URL and actually try to fetch from our client with that same get entries function content type post, and then I'm specifying another part to the query to say, hey, I want the fields.slug to be equal to this slug that the user is currently on. If the response doesn't return anything back, we're going to redirect the user back to the all posts page, this page. And if we do find, or we do get a response back, we're going to send that post, which you can find on the response items or number one, because we're using the get entries function, it always returns an array, even if there is one post in it. So I'm receiving this response items. This is the same thing that we were getting response items there. There it had all of our posts. Here, we're only interested in the first one, or it should only have one, because the slug, as you remember, we set it to be unique. So if I go back to my content model, to my posts, if you look at this slug setting, we have specified that this guy is unique. So there's only one of these entries on my site that has this slug. And we're sending that specific blog post back to our page. Okay, and this is our page component. Again, ignore the preview for now. So we're sending this post to our page, and what we're doing is we're rendering a post header and a post body. So let's create these two to be able to see the content of the post, and then I'm going to explain the get static paths, and then this kind of fallback skeleton that we're going to be showing over here. So let's start from the post header. So inside of our components, posts, I'm going to create a new component called post header. Let me just copy. Okay, so we have avatar, date component, Contentful image. That's the same thing we have created, avatar and a date component. So everything is what we already have. There shouldn't be any problems. The other thing that we need is a post body component. So let's just go ahead and create this post body component. Again, let me just copy everything over here. Now that we have these two, I'm going to come back to this post body and this rich text component in a second. But before we dive into the rich text or the content that's coming from our blog post, let's just quickly address this. On any dynamic route in Next.js, you need to also provide this get static paths function, which instructs Next.js which paths or which slugs it should build statically at build time. Without it, it doesn't know what pages to build statically, but with it, we can just specify looping over all of our pages or contents or entries in Contentful and instruct Next.js to create these pages statically at build time. So what we're doing is we're calling the get entries function, content type post. We're going to get all of the items, map over them, and for each item we're going to return this object that has a params property with a slug property on it that just points to that item's slug. We're going to return this paths and a fallback, optional fallback you can pass in. Actually, it's not optional. Not sure what's the default value, but fallback is basically saying if the user tried to access a page that we did not return in these paths, what should we do? If you set the fallbacks to true, it says, hey, there might be pages that I did not return here in the path. So just go ahead and try to create or generate that page on demand and show a fallback to the user, which is this a skeleton we're going to talk about in a second. So it's just a loading skeleton. So we're going to fall back to a loading skeleton. Next.js is going to go ahead and build this page on demand. And then once it is ready, it's going to swap this loading kind of skeleton with the actual post header and body. Now that's when you set it to true. If you set it to false, it means that, hey, these are the pages that I have and I want you to statically build them. If the user tried to access any other page other than this, just 404, that doesn't exist. So that's fallback false. And then there's a third option, fallback blocking, whereby it's just similar to setting it to true, where it would just generate that page on demand. But the only difference is that it doesn't show this fallback skeleton. It just blocks the browser, the user, until that page is generated, so that the user would see like a blank page until the content is ready. Then they would see the blog post. So true, if you wanted to kind of build these pages on demand, the true is better, because at least you could show the user a loading spinner, a loading a skeleton while this is being built. But if you want, you could also set it to blocking. Okay, so this is just a little housekeeping from Next.js that instructs it to build these pages statically at build time. Now that we talked about this as skeleton, let's just quickly take it. Let's just quickly build this one together. So in the UI, again, we're going to have this skeleton, which is just a kind of loading structure. So let's go component UI and let's just build this skeleton.jsx, copy the code. And all we're doing here is just showing a bunch of divs that have an animation on them to kind of show a loading state. We're going to see this together. So going back to our page, the preview alert, let me just comment this out for now. We're going to get back to this later on when we wanted to enable previewing content. Now in the post body, the post header, we already had all the used components. In the post body, we were using this rich text. So let me just comment this out. And instead of using that rich text, show this content. So what are we doing here? So we showed the post header and all the relevant information, such as the title, the name, the avatar, the image. But the content is actually, if you remember here, if I go to this content model, on every blog post, we have this content field, which if you could see, just make this a bit bigger too. So this content is a rich text. So on our blog post, let's say on our first blog post, you could see I have headings, I have bold text and italics, I have block quotes and stuff, right? Now, all of this is going to be parsed automatically when you're using the Contentful client, this one that we created here. This client automatically parses these rich texts to the corresponding tags, like the heading to show with the corresponding heading, the bold text, the italic, the block quotes and stuff. So let's just put it out there. So in the body, all we're doing is we're getting this content field, which is that same field that we defined together on our post, this content field. And we're getting that from our posts fields. And let's just show the contents here. So if I go to first blog post, this rich text, let me just comment this out for a second. Also the preview alert, sure, we haven't created this. Okay, as you can see, this encounters an error. And the reason why is this content field that we're trying to show here is an object. And objects are not valid React children. So let me just comment this one out as well and actually log the contents of this content field. Okay, so as you can see, our title image and cover image and avatar is showing up. Let's just inspect this guy. Let me just bring this down, make this a bit bigger. So as you can see over here, this object is this content that we are logging. So it's an object itself that contains content and data, and the content inside of it is just an array of everything that we have on our page. So if we go back to this content, all of these paragraphs and lines and different things are now represented with this array of objects that each one, as you can see here, the node type is paragraph, heading, paragraph, block code. These are kind of the JSON representation of our content there. Now to render this object as a React component, as you can see, we encountered an error if you just put it out there directly. So we have to use another package from Contentful that turns this object, this JSON object, into React components. And that package is called, let me just copy the name from here. So the package is called Contentful Rich Text React Renderer. This is from Contentful and allows you to turn rich text documents or JSON objects into React components. Let me just restart the dev server. So what are we going to do? We're going to have to define this rich text custom component, and I'm going to put this directly in the components folder. So I'm going to say rich text.jsx. Okay. Let's just do this step by step. So the first thing that we do is to import this document to React component from the package we just installed. And we're defining this rich text component that takes in a content that we're passing to it like so. And that's the content, this same JSON object we looked at it together. And this function is going to turn that into React components that we can use. We can optionally pass it some options. So for now, I'm going to just say this options is an empty object. Okay. And back here, we are having our components back. And now, if I close this guy, you can see my content is showing up here. So I have this blog post, this is a heading. It's not looking like a heading, but I at least have my content on my page without any errors. Now to style them, let's just inspect the page real quick. So as you can see, when this function is actually parsing that JSON data, it is returning the correct tags or HTML tags for us. Excuse me. So if we had a paragraph versus a heading, a block code component, or a link, so it turns them to corresponding HTML tags. We just need to style them. Now, if you can see here, I'm wrapping this rich text component with this div, and I'm including this Tailwind Pros class. But right now it's not working. Now if we go to Tailwind, this is an easy way for us to style HTML in bulk. So there is this Tailwind typography package that we can install, which allows us to pass this prose class to markdown files or the content that's coming from like a CMS that we can control to putting classes on. And when we include this prose class as on the wrapper element of anything that's inside of it, it just goes ahead and styles those different HTML tags inside of this kind of prose wrapper without us having to specifically set any classes on individual tags that's returned from this document to React component function. So let's just go ahead and install this Tailwind typography package. Let me stop the dev server. So npm i-d and we need to add it as a plugin to our config. So in the plugin here, I can just include this. And now if I restart my dev server, and I go to posts, and my first post, as you can see, now everything is styled correctly. So this is a heading, the italic and bold, the block code. And if I go back to my posts, to my second post, I can see here that I have my list items and I have my external link working correctly. But my internal link, so if I show it in the content, if we go to the second post over here, I have an internal link here that links to the first blog post. And right now, this is just showing as an object or as an entry type, entry hyperlink and ID. It's not showing correctly. We're going to fix this together. And the code, this kind of block is not kind of styled properly. The embed video is not showing up, the embed asset or the image that we could see over here. So this image and this component is not showing up because we're not doing anything about it. We're going to fix that in a second. But at least we got the basics of our post content fetched from Contentful, and it's being styled easily with this Tailwind typography utility package that just styles this HTML tags that are inside of this prose class. Okay. Now let's go back to this rich text component and the different options that we can pass in so that we could take care of internal links, assets and videos that we embed in our file. Now, this document to React component, what it does is it will iterate over the arrays of that content we saw together, and for each one decides what to render. And we have some control over what we want to output in different cases. So let me just bring in the complete file here. I'm going to explain what each of these methods are doing over here. But basically, to begin, this is just the same thing we had before. Document to React component. We are just iterating over our content and trying to kind of parse them into React components. Now we're populating some options here that gives us more control in the output of this function. Now, before I explain that, I want to point out to this document on Contentful docs that talks about this customizing rendering in React, which is basically using this same function and this extra package we're going to install together that allows us to define some types. So for example, if we are dealing with a bold type of marks or a paragraph from the blocks type, we get to decide what the output of this parser or this function is going to be. For example, here it has defined a text component that takes in the children and returns a paragraph with a specific class. And we're saying, hey, inside of our options in the render node, anytime that you're encountering a node of type paragraph, just render that text. Anytime you're encountering a bold element, just render this bold custom component that's just a span with a class name of bold. And then we are calling this document to React component. We're passing in the document or our content together with these options. Basically, we're doing the same thing over here. We have to install this package. So let me just stop the dev server first of all and install that package so we can use different types that comes in when we're parsing our content. Let me just run the dev server again and let's see what we're doing here. So I have two outermost methods, the render mark and render node. Each one of them take in different properties that are again methods. So in the code, I'm saying, hey, if you got a code, which is the code blocks that we had on our post over here. Where was it? Yep, here. So I'm saying just wrap them in a pre-tag and a code. So that's the code. I could have just added maybe marks.bold as we just saw together, get the text, and maybe just return a span with that text. And let's just put a class name of font bold from Tailwind, right? So that's how easy, if I can type correctly, that's how easy you can customize the return value of each node and each kind of segment or element inside of this content object. Okay, just gonna remove this. Now that was the marks. The second part is the render node. Here for the paragraphs, all I'm doing is that I'm saying if there was a code inside of a paragraph, just show a div inside of a p tag, because the browser is going to scream at you if you put a pre-tag inside of a p tag. So I'm just changing it to div tag so that it doesn't scream at me. For every other cases, I'm just returning a regular paragraph tag. So that's the first thing that I'm doing. The second thing is taking care of hyperlinks. So if I'm having an inline link to another entry of my own content, which is this first blog post that we saw together, it wasn't working before, it's working now because of this. So all I'm saying is that, hey, this link to an entry is called entry hyperlink. So if you encounter that, look to see if the content type is of post. So if the link is actually to another post, because it can be to another author, it can be to another maybe video. If it is a post, just render a link with this post's kind of href. So therefore, this just takes us to the first post correctly, because I have defined the path or the structure here in this inline kind of option that I have over here. Now the inline's hyperlink, this is where we would have just an external link. So if you go back over here, this Google one is just an external link. It's called hyperlink. It's not entry hyperlink. And in that case, I'm just rendering an A tag with a target blank. So if I click on it, it should open on a new page. Okay, easy as that. Now these last two are when we are embedding entries or assets on our site. So remember, if I go back to our content, if you remember here, I had an embedded asset. So this is an asset we created together. Now I'm just including it here. So how do we go about showing this asset? So this is the last option here. So I'm going to start with this. I'm saying, hey, if you have an embedded asset, right? And my embedded asset is an image. So go ahead and create a contentful image component and pass in those components. So now you might ask, an embedded asset may be a video. Well, in this case, I don't have it, but if you do, you'd have to just check in to see if the type is image or if it's a video, and then render the correct component. For me, the only assets that I have created are images, so I'm saying, hey, just render that same contentful image component that we created before and pass in these necessary props to it. So that's easy. Now the next one is this embedded video that you can see over here. How do we go about doing that? And that's the block embed entry over here that I'm going to come back to this part in a second. But the way that I am doing it is, if you come to this rich text editor when you are kind of editing your blog post, there is no way in this content kind of section for me to embed a video. There are links and text options, list options, but nothing for me to embed a video. So the way that I'm doing it is I'm creating a different type called embed video, and then I'm using this embed functionality to embed an entry. So let's just go one level back. In the content model, I've created this video embed type that has a title and a short text field where you can paste in an embed URL. So from this content model, we can create now some contents, and I went ahead and created this content. So we can see this from our content type video embed. If you click on it, I've created just one entry. I've gave it a title, which is one of my videos on the channel, the Next.js 13 introduction, and then I've pasted in the embed URL. Now, one quick note over here, if you want to get the link for the embed, don't just copy the link that you see, let's say here. If you go on any of these,
long to see our first guest tonight.
You shouldn't copy this link, because this just errors out if you're copying this inside of an iframe in your site. Instead, you could just go here and get the share, or here, get the embed, and get this link, which is the embed link for that. And I guess this is just like you could just update that yourself too, change the watch and then remove these two characters. But you can just copy it from here so that it works properly when you're pasting this inside of an iframe, because that's how we're going to be showing it later, inside of an iframe. That's how we embed videos on our site. But nevertheless, I have created an entry for this video embed type of this type. So I can go back to my content on the second blog post, and I can say, hey, if I come in here and say embed entry, it allows me to embed any of my entries, and I can select that single entry that I created for my Next.js video on the channel. So that's what we've done here, right? Now in the back end here, when we're parsing this content, these are called embed entry, okay? So it's an embedded entry. I'm saying, hey, if you encounter one of these guys, check to see if the content type is video embed. And this is what I have defined over here. This video embed, if you look at the ID, is just video embed. So I'm saying, if it is video embed, show this iframe, drill down into the fields, get the embed URL and the title, and just show it on the page. That's why it's showing up the way that it's supposed to be. Now, you may create more entries or more embed entries that you would put on your page. All you need to do is to check the type. Let's say maybe I want to have my own code blocks. I don't want to use these code blocks like this. I want to have a specific kind of type for code blocks. And inside of them, I want to maybe style them differently or put in different fields. Maybe I want to put in what type of language this is, or what's the file name, so forth and so on. And then I want to create entries for that code block and then embed those entries inside of my blog post. So therefore here in this if check for the content type, I'll check to see if this is a code block versus a video embed. So the sky's the limit. You can have so many different content types that you can put in here. It's just that for this tutorial, I just had one, and that's the only one that I'm checking, which allows me to show the content of my page. Let's now talk about the preview functionality in Contentful. So right now, anytime that we are changing and updating a content, we are publishing it before we are able to see it on our site. What if we just want to preview the changes we have with this open preview functionality before actually publishing it? And I guess this will be more useful when you're deploying your app and your content editors and marketing team is trying to kind of update or create a new entry, and then they want to preview it before publishing it on the actual site. So let's see how we can set this up. So if you go to your settings, there is a content preview tab over here. When you come here for the first time, there is nothing. I've already created one, but you can just go ahead and create a content preview. And here you will give it a name, and then you would specify a preview URL. So here I'm specifying the local host because this is where I'm running right now, and this is how I want to enable or where I want to preview my content. I'm hitting the API preview. This is an endpoint we have to create together. And then I'm passing in a secret to be sure that this request is coming in actually from Contentful by hitting that open preview and not somebody else hitting this endpoint. And I'm passing in a slug. As you can see on the right hand side, it shows you what dynamically Contentful would insert here for you. So I'm saying, hey, I want to get this slug. So I want to be able to preview posts. This is the type of entry. If I had more entries or more types over here, it would allow me to choose them. Right now I have author or post or video embed. These are the only three types that I have. And I've only enabled to preview my posts. And I'm saying pass the slug of that post here to this API endpoint so I know what content to fetch and what content to show. So the first step is to specify this. And if you wanted to specify one for not the development, actually for your live site, instead of specifying localhost here, you would just plug in the endpoint, the domain of your live application. So on here, on our application, we have to create these API endpoints. So I'm going to rename this to preview. And I'm going to paste in the code and I'm going to explain what exactly is happening. Now, the first thing that we are doing here is destructuring the secret and the slug out of the request. And these are the stuff that we sent over here. So the slug is provided for us by Contentful, and the secret is whatever we chosen here. This is a way to just check to see that this request again is coming from Contentful. So the first step, we are saying if there is no slug or the secret is not the secret that we are setting in our environment variable, just return a 401 bad request and say invalid token. So we need to pass in two more environment variables. Now, we had the space ID and the regular access token set before. I just deleted them here to be able to show you these two. So for the preview functionality, we need the preview secret and the preview access token. So for the preview access token, you can just go ahead to your API keys. I have shown this in the beginning. You might remember. So we had two API keys. One was for content delivery API, and the second one was for content preview API access token. So all you need to do is to copy this access token so you can use to create a client, a preview client from Contentful that allows us to fetch unpublished or draft content. So the preview access token is the guy from your dashboard, and this preview secret is whatever you just passed in this secret over here. I said preview, you could say whatever secret you want. It's the same thing you would just set over here. Sorry. like so. Okay, once you've done that, let me just copy mine too, and then we'll continue. Okay, I've copied my environment variables, and now we can create this preview client. Now, all we need to do to create this preview client is go to library where we are requiring that Contentful package and creating a client, and actually create a second client. It's very similar to the way that we're doing it there. It's just a preview client. And the difference is the host is preview.contentful.com. Here, the host just defaults to I think contentful.com. You don't need to pass it. It defaults to that. But for the preview, we have to set it to the preview kind of subdomain of Contentful. The space ID is the same, but the access token this time is this Contentful preview access token we just set together. Now with this, we're having two clients for Contentful. One is just a regular client that fetches the published content. The other one, the preview client, fetches unpublished or draft content. Okay, so let's save this, go back to our preview. So all we're really doing here is to check the secret and slug to see actually if they've passed in the secret and if it matches the environment variable secret that we just set together. If not, we're going to say invalid token. And then we're going to check to see if actually there is a post on our Contentful with this slug. If that post doesn't even exist, we're going to say this is an invalid slug you're trying to preview. And if everything goes well, all we're doing is we're setting this preview data cookie, and then we're redirecting the user back to the posts for that slug, which just brings them back to this dynamic path that we've defined before, but this time with a difference. With this cookie that sets the preview data. Now this, all it's going to do is going to set this preview data in Next.js. So with that cookie we're setting on the API route, this preview is going to be true on the context object that's passed to this get static props. And if you remember in the beginning, I said just ignore this preview for now, but all we're using this for is to say, hey, if this preview is true, use the preview client. If it's false, which defaults to false if we never passed or set that cookie, it's just going to use the regular client which fetches the published content. So again, in this preview endpoint, we are still using that same get static props on same pages to preview our content. It's just that we are using a different client to now this time fetch a draft or unpublished version of this specific post for that slug. And then on the page component itself too, we are receiving this preview, and then we are showing this preview alert. And the reason why we do that is we're going to see in a second, when you actually go to the preview page, you want to have a way for the user to exit the preview because they're going to be on that same endpoint anyways. So let's actually try that. So let's just go to our contents in Contentful. So let's go to this second post block, and let's say I want to put in some exclamation marks at the end of the title. I'm not going to publish it. I'm just going to wait for this to save, and then I'm going to just hit open preview. And all this does is again hits that endpoint, checks to see if this slugs actually exist or not, and then redirects us back to this post, second post with this slug, which is just this function we have been working on before, but this time because we're using the preview client, we're just getting this draft version which has this exclamation points. Now again, because we are on that same endpoint, we want to give the user a way to exit the preview so that they could see actually the published content. And to do that, we have to define a new endpoint called exit-preview.js. Let me just copy the code here. Okay, so all this endpoint is doing is it's clearing the preview data that we set over here. And all that does is just turns this preview back to false. So therefore, we are going to use the regular client, which fetches the already published content and not the draft. Okay, so that's all this endpoint is doing. And then after clearing the data, the preview data, it just redirects the user back to the home page. Now we have to give the user a way to hit this endpoint. And this is where this preview alert component comes in. So let me just uncomment this here. So in the components UI, I have passed in or copied this preview alert, and all this is doing is actually showing a little toast notification on top of the page that tells the user this is a preview and gives them a link, and that link hits that endpoint we just created, API exit preview. So once they hit there, the preview data will be cleared and they will be redirected back to the home page where they can just use the regular client to fetch published content. Now this component I just copied is using headless UI. So let me just go ahead and install these packages. And it's actually using, let me see, this icons too. So let me go to components, to documentation. I think we are actually using hero icons too. So let's just copy that one as well. If you don't know what headless UI is, a library from the Tailwind team that gives you UI components. So headless UI, it's different UI components and they're undesigned, so you can just use them. It's great. So let me just rerun the dev server over here, close that. And here on the blog post, okay, so right now we are seeing the published content. We don't see the exclamation point. If I go over here and say open preview, we're going to see the open preview, the preview with these exclamations, and that's the pop-up toast notification that I just set with this alert preview. And again, we're just conditionally showing this. If this preview that's returned back from get static props is true, we're just showing that preview alert. It just says, hey, this page is preview. Click here to exit the preview mode. Once we click here, it just goes back to the home page. And again, this exit preview, all it does is just clears that preview data and redirects the user back to the home page. So this time, if I just go to the second blog post, now I'm using the regular client from Contentful. I'm just getting the regular posts and not the drafts. That's a wrap for this video, folks. I know we covered a lot of grounds with Contentful and Next.js in this video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I try to be as responsive as I can there. And if this is type of content that you like, and if you're interested into learning how to build full stack apps with React and Next.js, you might be interested in checking out my course, the full Next.js course that we have. I'm going to include a link in the description below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.